Thank you. Thank you. All right, got it. These are our meeting agreements we go through before each meeting. So we'll just go through them. And if you have any questions, please let me know. First one is practice active and empathetic listening and sharing. Challenge the idea, not the person. Be both teachers and learners. Take space and make space. Stories stay and lessons leave. Use I statements. One person speaks at a time and be here now. We want you all to be here in the discussion now. All right, moving on, our check-in question today. And since we have such a large, awesome group, we'll go ahead and put in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, and what is your favorite season of the year. I, Laura Jackson, I am located in Eugene, Oregon, recently-ish, within a year and a half or so, almost 2 years, relocated from California. So I think my favorite season is fall because we get one here and it's not so much in California. It's fun to experience it. All right, Lisa from Connecticut says spring. Marty from Boston says fall. I can imagine a fall Boston, both Marty and Danny. Fall in Boston, I can imagine, is beautiful. Libby says summertime. Oh, interesting, Nadine. Chicago winter. I feel like that's a lot. A lot of falls. Summer, autumn in Seattle from Janice. Yeah, same as here. It's a beautiful time. And Katie, yeah. It's interesting having 4 different seasons, right? Coming from California.
Right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll go ahead and move on. And I will pass the mic over to Lisa, who has worked with American College of Physicians. They published this paper, the Beyond the Referral Principles of Effective Ongoing Primary and Specialty Care Collaboration. So Lisa, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. And I really want to thank Libby and the entire network team for giving me the opportunity to represent them, not just the opportunity, the honor and privilege, because it was such a good experience. And it was a real example of teamwork, first of all. They brought in all different stakeholders, and there were several people representing the patient's voice, patient perspective, and we were listened to, we were heard. So it was really wonderful. And it was meaningful too, because it really put together, I think, a plan for the direction that healthcare is moving in some of the more, I think, forward-thinking practices, and should be moving in my opinion, in most of the others, because we have specialists, we have primary care, we don't have enough primary care doctors, and we have to figure out how to manage it, and we have to identify what the problems are. And this is what this publication really addressed, the whole thing from the beginning to the end, soup to nuts. They looked at what was primarily in the best interest of patients, and they took things through the eyes of the patients, even from their perspective. Communication rose to the top as far as what we want to be concerned about, and the paper is available. Laura will be making it available for anybody who wants to see it, I presume.
Yes, I can actually put it in the chat now, and we'll add it to our forums as well.
Yeah, and there's also a playbook as well that was put out with it. So they get into the nuts and bolts. They get into how you do what you need to do to make this happen. And they are going into their logic and their reasoning when they are going through each of the things. We dealt with 4, I don't remember if it was 4, but the referral process, who's responsible for the referral, who's responsible for following through on pieces of it. They went into what if there needs to be a referral from a specialist to a specialist? What if the patient is moving? What if the patient is transitioning from pediatric care to adult care? They really, I mean, they really knocked it out of the park in a sense, because they really thought about it, and their thoughtfulness allowed it to be very, very comprehensive. They appreciated how important that hub in the center of the wheel is to coordinate things, but they also asked, who should be coordinating care at which points. So it's a very, very important paper. They created the process of the referrals. They even went into what information needs to be communicated in a referral, and how should that referral be done? When should there be verbal verbal communication confirmations? When can things be done through the patient record? What support the patient needs? And they identified critical elements of the referral to the referral, that, the patient's demographics and scheduling, the referral information. They identified what information really needs to come across, be communicated. And then they kind of created what paperwork needs to transfer with the patient. It's something that didn't leave too much to chance once it was finally done. And the thing that, of course, I was very impressed with was the huge emphasis on partnering with the patient, and that they need to be able to make their own final decisions about care, and they need to have background information so that they can make informed decisions. I mean, we really covered everything. So I suggest that anybody who's a patient, anybody who works with patients, anybody who's a practicing clinician should all avail yourself of this particular document and of the playbook, because I've never seen it. I go through a lot of literature, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere, and I don't say I'm so thorough that I couldn't have missed it, but I haven't seen anything this comprehensive, and I think it's very well needed, and it could really improve patient care. So that's really what I have to say about it. I think the cool takeaway is that reading it just puts such clarity to the process of shared care in all versions and all forms of it in our treatment. And that is the direction we're going in, where specialists are getting more specialized, and there's so many more layers to medical care, from the receptionist, who's as important as the practitioner. So that's what I have to say. I'll be happy, like, if anybody has questions or anything, I don't know that I'll have answers, but I'll certainly be happy to try.
Thank you, Lisa. Nadine?
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I was most intrigued when you got around to talking about the critical elements. Actually, I had to look at my notes so I get the phrase right. Is it from a clinician perspective, or is it from a patient perspective, or do they meld together?
They put everything together. There were patients and clinicians involved in all the group discussions. So when we were all trying to come up with the different elements throughout the entire paper, everybody's perspective was included. What they are definitely doing though is writing this so that the patients, what's important to patients is definitely addressed. And of course the healthcare providers too, because it would be silly, you can't do it without them, but they're making sure that patients are at an equal plane, an equal level.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Libby, got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And thanks so much for making the time in your busy schedule to participate in this important piece of work. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about kind of how it was organized in terms of, all of us on here have had experiences partnering with healthcare, and sometimes they're really robust partnerships and sometimes they're less so. And I'm always trying to figure out what are those elements that really make it a robust partnership where you feel like you were really heard in the process and not just sort of at the table as a checkbox.
Yeah, that is a really good question, because I've also, experienced all different kinds of participation. This was the truest sense of inclusiveness. We were given no less regard than any of the other participants, the patient group. We were also, though, we kind of had certain meetings that were isolated to, were just inclusive of us, where it allowed us to speak, I think, a little bit more freely and a little more candid. And yet we were equally able to participate in any of the other conversations. The professionals, the members of the American College of Physicians certainly had their own meetings and did a lot of work behind the scenes. There's no doubt about that. But we were on like work group committees that included members and us. And our input was equally valued, equally heard, not just listened to, but heard. The facilitators, I thought, were quite good. Although I will say, it's interesting, I was initially assigned to 2 different work groups, overarching work groups. And one of them, I almost never had any idea what was going on. And I think they kind of did it on their own. I didn't even, they talked about it was going to be mostly virtual and everything else. It was beyond virtual. I couldn't find it. But the other work group, which was more than enough engagement and capacity taking of mine, was so robust and so inclusive and was really overlapping with the first work group that, in my case, I didn't feel there was a need to make an issue or a point out of the fact that the communication on one work group was a little bit less than ideal. But I do think that the work group that was the one that I really thoroughly enjoyed, I think it was just that we were thought of as no different than anybody else who was participating. And I think that that's very, very important, because it's communicated through the questions, through the input, through when you see your ideas put into the actual product. And it was throughout. So it was just, you feel it. You really just feel it. It's, and it came across from the very beginning, from the get-go. And it was based on the structure. And there was a lot of communication back and forth. So, as a patient going into it, not having worked with this group at all before, I didn't know what my expectations should be. And right from the get-go, because of the communication in the one work group and it was expansive, that one work group. So in that one work group, it was clear that we were as equally involved and welcomed and made to feel comfortable. And it was just very, very worthwhile. And I think we have a responsibility when we're in work groups like the other one, and perhaps I fell short of that, of bringing it to someone's attention, like that, there are there are some of us out here who might have something to add. Maybe we won't, but we might, and maybe we should take the responsibility to bring it forward a little bit more forcefully. I did at the beginning try, and I didn't feel at that point that it was so much worth my effort. I did stay in touch with it and stuff, but it just didn't, and it was all part of this final product. But
it's hard to know. It's hard to hit that balance sometimes of where, you know, you've got space, you're in the room, how, you know, how you help people move on their journey to really engage value in a valuable way, you know, balancing kind of how you help them along their journey and, you know, losing the space, the potential.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. And I think, you know, not wanting to offend anybody, it was my very first time working with this group. I must have opened my mouth at least once or twice, you know, through email or whatever, because to, you know, introduce ideas. But I like to fill out and get to know a room before I really jump into the middle of it. And I didn't feel that I really had a great feel for that room. And it was their style, clearly, the facilitators. And it apparently worked because they still got their purpose introduced into the paper and their ideas and everything else. So I think, you know, we do have to be willing to give and take a little bit, just make sure that we're not offended and stepped on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. We did have a question in the chat from Tausi. Yes, did they spend much time on goals of care for each patient?
Yes and no, because it wasn't getting into it was getting into theoretical like a high level overview process. So it didn't get into specific care or anything. The goals were to make sure that the patient's healthcare objectives, as defined by them, were able to be met. And I think that was the main drive and motivation was, you know, you don't want to have somebody bouncing back and forth between a dozen doctors. You want to have one person who really does have a good idea of you and what you're trying to achieve. And the whole purpose of referral to specialist was interesting because it wasn't that you're necessarily going to shoot the patient over to the specialist and the specialist will run with that patient until that issue is fully resolved. The idea was actually to sometimes just get a consult with a specialist, sometimes to have the specialist pick up the patient initially, and then once the plan of care is set, to turn the patient back to the care of the primary care, who can run with the plan unless they have further question or unless they don't have, you know, full comfort in doing so. And so it kind of changed roles of providers, but the overarching purpose of the whole paper was to make sure that patients get better care and complete care, skilled care, and that they are equally involved in the plans of care and that the problems get dealt with. So it took care of it all. I think I answered your question, but if I didn't, please let me know.
Was that good, Tausi? Yeah. All right. Ting, you have a question or comment? Oh, you're muted.
Lisa, thanks for your description. I'd like to follow up on Libby's question, actually, because, and maybe a question is for everybody. There's still a power dynamics. It's really you're basically the healthcare people actually ask, unless the person, there's a healthcare person that really feel it's valuable, then they invite you. So in a certain sense, I'm trying to find out the various people how do you see the dynamics? Can it be improved so that the PFAC member have a little bit more say? Because I do notice that even with my involvement as PFAC at Stanford, depends on who the healthcare provider side was overseeing it. It makes a big difference. I don't know if that's a similar experience for everyone here.
So, yeah, and excuse me one sec. It's I think that we my God, I'm sorry, I just got thrown off track. Just give me 2 words to get me back on. What is the
It's a power dynamics.
yeah
Who sort of its initiation is really from the healthcare provider still. I don't know, and maybe there's people who have better experience, that idea actually from the PFAC side, generating and getting the buy-in from the healthcare provider. I don't know if people have experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a question, I think, for the entire group to see, how other people feel. I think what they were trying to address here actually was to sort of create the expectation of roles so that you wouldn't have that power play going on. And I don't know, I wonder, and this is just me personally, if the different types of institutions, the academic institutions versus the smaller ones might have a different level of that type of power play. But I think that the purpose of this was to set up a procedure that equalized the different players, because it just made it clear what their roles were. And they didn't have to be heroes. They just had to move the patient care along to the next step, which I thought was very comfortable from a patient perspective. For me, I don't want a doctor trying to out-doctor another, doctor. And I also want everybody working together in my care, and I want to have the ultimate say as a patient. And all of these things really depend on the culture of the clinician and of the group that they're part of and of the facility that they're tied to. So I think that cultural change has to walk side by side with instituting practices like these in terms of communication and co-treatment and sharing care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Lisa. Anybody else on PFACs that have experience with that? Marty or Sherry? Anyone
I
else?
think Janice's hand is up.
Oh, Janice. Yes.
Hi, I'm on more national PFACs, and I used to be on our local PFAC, but anyway, they all shut down. Now they're open again, and I haven't actually applied, but I do attend through the senior caucus. But I just want to say that what's interesting here is I see a huge difference. I'm so fortunate to be a part of Kaiser, Washington. It's not the same in all the states. Kaiser's different in different places. But at my specific clinic, I have everything there. They can do surgery there. They do, I have my radiology there, my blood, everything in one site, right? It's all there. I go to the doctor, I can go do a urine test. I can go do everything at once. And so when we're talking about referrals to specialty, and specialty doctors are also included on different floors, right? So I could see PT, I could go to my ortho, or I could go to my ophthalmologist, all at the same area. I feel so fortunate for that. I don't even look at other, go to other opportunities because I don't want to lose that access. And so when we're talking about referrals, going somewhere, I saw that somebody mentioned, and they said they really appreciated what you said Lisa, what you're talking about here is because so often when the referrals came in, there wasn't enough information on the patient and what they needed to actually, you know, to push the referral forward. And if they don't have that, then that slows everything, the whole process, right? And actually it falls on us as patients somewhat to say, you know, we feel bad that it's taking 2 or 3 weeks when it should have taken, you know, 4 days, you have cancer or something. And where we should be proactive, perhaps what most patients aren't, it shouldn't fall on us to say, you know, I'm hoping this referral will go through, you know, easily. I actually had this happen with my hip. They denied my hip surgery in the initial one. And my doctor told me that this was a standard procedure. I was supposed to, it was a day surgery and they said, we won't pay for overnight. And I found out that they just do this. It was just added time to them. It stressed me out. It came on a Friday afternoon. My doctor quickly wrote back and said, no, don't worry about it. They do this and we have to just follow up on it. But, you know, and that has to do with insurances. So when you're dealing with between systems is what I'm trying to get at for referrals, it's even more complicated, right?
Yeah, and that was a big deal in terms of, you know, what our discussions were about, because most often for most of us, it is between systems. And it starts feeling sometimes like the insurance company is our ultimate provider, because they're saying, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do that. And they have no business, you know, really making those decisions. I love what you're describing at Kaiser, and Kaiser offers some really great opportunities for patients. But, you know, and I do want to say, I mean, like, I think that yours is one extreme of healthcare service where it's all coordinated. It's kind of like the medical home. And, you know, then there are people in other places where they have to go from one place to another place to another place. And then they have to hope that all the information gets shared properly and that the right physician ends up taking care of them. I think one thing that we as patients can do, at the very least, I think that this whole publication talks about, it really goes into care coordination. And so I think as PFAC members, we should try to bring these publications to our hospitals, our medical practices, wherever we are on the PFAC, and suggest that they read it and think about it and maybe institute it. And maybe they you know, can do it in small bits, because nobody likes to make any change happen really fast, it seems. But you know, we as patients, that's something that we can do. We can share this with our healthcare community, if we feel that it's something that we're in agreement with, and just keep introducing these ideas to them and ask, you know, how can we help support you that way?
I love that, Lisa. I think that is the absolute purpose for the PFA network, is to really come together in these meetings, share what we've been working on, and then, you know, just keep spreading. This is the power of this community, I think.
Yep. Definitely. Sherry.
I think one of the things that I haven't heard yet, maybe I just misheard, is the need, I think, in these systems, particularly where you've got practice that refers to practices outside of the area because they're affiliated, and the patient's kind of betwixt and between, and probably not on their best cognition or sense of well-being. I think we need to really push to have navigators within these systems that walk the walk with the patient and don't leave the outcomes up to the patients to make sure that they've got the outcomes that they want. But I would love to see us develop some sort of a guideline or training program for patient navigators in the referral process. I think that's something that we probably have the ability to do within this group and make available. But it's been something that seems to come up over and over again over the last several years worth of this type of conversation.
If I could jump in here, it's such a good point, Sherry. And I think it comes out in so many different ways. And I think a patient navigator could be incredibly useful. But what I get concerned about is adding another person to the mix without removing something, right? And so we just keep kind of doing this Lego thing. And so that would be part, I think, of those guidelines, is to say for an organization, you know, what responsibilities are moved to this person, and be very intentional about where it comes out to move into that patient navigator. Do you know what I'm saying? I worry about just stack more and more and more. More isn't always better.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think oftentimes if somebody has a position to which they're assigned, they tend to take ownership of that and have blinders on. So I don't think necessarily it would be helpful to write a job description, so to speak, but to give points of guidance. You should have a patient navigator available if your patient is compromised cognitively, or if they don't have a strong care system. That navigator should meet with the patient and find out what their goals are, find out what their concerns are, and offer to be there to help if the patient feels frustrated that they're not being understood, or that their energies are being overtaxed with all of the travel that they're having to do. Is there anything closer? You know, those sorts of things. I think these are tips that, and maybe I just need to sit down and write some of those thoughts down and maybe present them to members of this group to sort of refine or add to or subtract from. We don't really have a place that I've seen that we can start with that kind of a model that would help systems walk through those potential pitfalls.
You know, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was
listening to Lisa and what she was presenting, that seemed to be a piece that was missing, and a piece that we might have the ability to flesh out.
I think that without calling them navigators, it was assigning the role of making sure that the patient knew what was going on, knew how to get there, took into consideration what their wants and desires were. That falls on the primary care provider, that hub of the wheel, and how they do it within their practice. It is sort of by their own design. But it's very interesting what you're saying, and I don't have an answer to this at all. But like, our organization is a patient advocacy organization. Number one, we're a resource. We get phone calls and emails all the time with people in different situations asking how to get this or how to get that. And the other thing we do is we offer workshops because patients don't know how to be patients. And I firmly believe that this kind of patient education, which is a piece of which you're talking about, a piece of which I'm adding to that, really does need to emanate from the primary care setup. The problem is, of course, realizing that so many people still don't have primary care providers. That has to be worked on simultaneously. So we have to go to wherever healthcare is delivered and see if we can use their captive audience to make what we can, what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, known. But I think in this particular model, it's kind of relegated to the primary care's office, and I think they do address it without identifying it as a particular person's responsibility, but that it is the overall responsibility of the primary care provider to do the different things or be available to support the different things that you're talking about.
If I could again, sorry. Oh, there's two hands up, Laura. But just really quickly, I just want to plant the seed of if something like that, something what Sherry's describing and Lisa's building on, could we not do that from the perspective of peer education? And not rely on the health system to move that forward, but move it forward as people using the health system?
Yeah. Yeah, and I also do like the idea of putting together a roadmap in a sense, maybe is what Sherry's talking about, for patients. I mean, there are, these things have been done, but it's changing all the time too. And then you get into the politics and power plays that go on at each of the different care providers. But I think this group would be a really good group to work on, because we're coming from so many different experiences, to work on that sort of navigation support piece. Because patients don't even know where to start looking, is what I find. I mean, we're all very educated and very experienced, but yeah, I agree with what Libby just posted, that that's the reason for a peer approach, because it gets out of organizational politics. And that concerns me. It's just like when a hospital has their patient advocate's office, and who's paying? Well, the hospital's paying, so that advocate is going to have to temper the way they handle situations. There's a lot of politics involved. And I think we as particularly experienced patient advocates who have navigated our own various healthcare encounters and situations, we've got a lot of wisdom amongst us.
We do, definitely do. Marty.
Thank you. I have the opportunity to present on Tuesday to CRICO, which is the insurance group for the Harvard Medical hospitals, on the ambulatory safety nets. In my experience, was pretty equal to Lisa's when I worked with Ariadne Labs. Once we see how that goes, I may share it with all of you. But the main thing is making sure that you have, because this ambulatory safety net, if you're not familiar with it, is people that should be getting scans or be getting return care are not necessarily coming in. So they're using the system to try to bring them back in, obviously to catch these or nip these things closer to the bud than letting them go. But because of the COVID process, it's been really difficult to do that. So when we're setting that up, it's a very similar process to the navigator process. And I think if we could help set up some of these guidelines and programs for healthcare systems to use, involving patients that have had the lived experience, working with the staff to make sure that the hospital itself is addressing these needs at every level, we could have a major impact on sort of this traditional or additional care. And it very much ties in with the PCPs, and particularly the medical home. So if you're fortunate enough, as we happen to be, not in every situation, but in our personal situations, to have that PCP directing traffic, it makes a big difference, or being the who's in charge. Because at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, I believe, unless you're in a chronic situation, your PCP is normally your go-to overseer. So I put that out there just as food for thought, and am happy after this, we do this, Barry Nelson is doing it with me, to share it with you either on a chat or just send you the program. But it's an interesting new way to do business, and it really will not happen if you don't have the support of the healthcare system, because all of the funding has to come out of their budget. We just provide the guidance. So if you've got that support, you could make a really positive impact. And I think like Janice said, you know, if you've got the healthcare system there, you're good to go. But those healthcare systems that do not currently provide that may need a little nudge from people like us. And getting papers out like this one in the ambulatory safety net and anything that we could come up with, I think will help reinforce this across the country.
Mhm.
Yeah, Marty, we would love to have you and Barry come on and chat about that. Let me know.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just happening now, and it fits in nicely with this conversation.
Definitely. And you're also more than welcome to share in the forums as well to start a discussion there too. So we will be in touch though, for sure. There is a question from Ting in the chat. Is there any measurements on care coordination?
So yes and no is what I've seen. It's disguised in other ways, but it does kind of at times overlap with care coordination. I know that National Quality Forum looks at measures that involve follow-up care after discharge from a hospital under certain circumstances and all, but the measures they're tough, because they try to pick specific things that can be generalized to other things without being directly the same as other things. And so it gets it, but it doesn't get it. And it's, it doesn't always reflect the reality of a situation, although it reflects, if there's a gross problem, I think you can pick it up through a measure like that, but not necessarily where the problem is. Also, like here in Connecticut, we're starting to we've created measures for different goals that we have, and we are looking at follow-up care after an emergency room visit and different measures like that, and that is care coordination. But I can just say from lived experience, care coordination isn't happening that well in most situations. So I'm not sure. They're hard measures to create, really hard. If anybody can think of them, share them with the group, because outcome measures like that matter to patients, they're not always so wonderful. And the other problem with measures is that when they institute measures, what I have learned, and this is the skeptical me who goes into all these different meetings, but they'll only do the ones that don't make it too hard for the people who are recording the data to participate. They don't want to add to their workload burden, which on one hand, I totally get. And on the other hand, we're getting stuck measuring the same types of things where the world's changing and there's so many more things to measure. But it would require active participation and time. And I really think it all comes back to who's paying people for their time. But the other half of that is that as we can cull information out of medical records rather than have people add to it, if we can get data from trails that are created by claims databases and things like that, we might be able to go further, because that is easier to do, and you can just analyze an entire big database. So, I mean, there's hope, but we've got to start looking at measures differently and more broadly in some respects.
Thank you. And we will actually take Tausie's question or comment, and then we're going to move on to our next discussion for the last 10 minutes or so. If you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat or email myself or Lisa, and we'll get those questions and comments over to Lisa. But Tausie, you had your hand up. I don't know if it was.
We can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I've worked a little bit with coordinating of care between hospitals and where patients go after that. And one of the metrics that is very easy to get is hospital readmission rates. And that's a really big red flag. And it is startling for patients, and it should be part of any patient education, is saying, you know, we're discharging you from the hospital to this, you know, rehab center or whatever. And the odds are 40% of you guys are going to come bouncing back at some point. It's just staggering what a large percentage of people that are discharged from hospitals end up coming back. And so that's something that you can work on. And at Emory, they worked on it with the places they were referring to. And one of the things that came up was that to get certain tests run, they'd bring them back to the hospital to run the test. And since they came back in to get the test, they'd get evaluated. And since they were already in bad shape, they'd readmit them, you know, so they had to figure out a way to change the process for running the test. So they say, okay, we know this patient is in this kind of situation. They're in a skilled nursing facility. They can manage this patient in this situation. They don't need to be readmitted. And so they'd run them in, get the test, and then take them right back. So, you know, things like that. So readmission rates is a good metric to look at. And also another metric to look at is how many days from when the patient is ready to be discharged until an appropriate facility can be found and approved. Because some of the Medicare Advantage plans have dismal rates of approving patients for transfer. So then the patient gets hung up in limbo. And so that's another coordination metric that's pretty easy. But yeah, it is hard to find them. That's what I have.
Thank you, Tausi. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Lisa, for sharing. And that was a wonderful discussion. We are going to move on to the next one for the last few minutes here, and that is improving the collection of racial, ethnicity, and language data. We've had some questions come in about this. About learning more about improving involvement in improving the collection of racial, ethnicity, and language data in an effort to improve healthcare discrepancy. So we have a few discussion questions to ask you all, and feel free to answer here in the coffee chat. You are also more than welcome to email me your answers. And again, we will add it into the forms. So there's different places to add your answers to the following discussion. Why can't I say that word today? Discussion questions. So the first one being, have you experienced harmful, misaligned, or inappropriate care caused in a hospital by inaccurate or incomplete demographic information about you? Specifically, your race, ethnicity, gender, identity, sexual orientation, or language preferences. So feel free to, you can raise your hand, come off mute, and share your experience. Janice, is your hand still raised? I'm not sure. Oh, no, okay.
Yeah, it was from before. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No, that's okay. It's okay. I've got a couple no's in the chat. Thank you. All right, move on to the next one here. Oh, Janice.
I could actually answer on that, but I was
Yeah.
talking about something else. I was actually kind of identified as being a Muslim years ago, and I was having eye surgery, and the clinician that when I went to get my records, because I felt the person was kind of surly, and I've never gone to a second opinion before that, but I just didn't feel comfortable. And when I went to get my record from that, it stated at the top Muslim, and it had been underlined, and then on the other side it said borderline, and I thought, is he giving me a psychological evaluation or what? And then somebody years later said it might have been he was just thinking your surgery might be borderline, but I think I was giving him the benefit of the doubt there. But anyway, he really called out and he asked me in person, what are you wearing? You know, what are you doing? And I was so offended, right? That was why I didn't say them. So that, I guess, you know, it's not a language or race, but it has to do with my spiritual, you know, orientation. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Katie.
Hey, okay, so 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I was pregnant with my son, and very stressful life circumstances. I mean, I fractured my hand, I got swine flu. I had one of the craziest pregnancies. I mean, every possible extreme stress that could have happened during pregnancy happened. Called for jury duty. I think I said swine flu. I mean, closed my business. I mean, it was a career change. And my obstetrician said, well, stress is not a high risk factor in pregnancy. Well, we know that that's absolutely not true. So he said, I mean, if you were a smoker, if you were doing drugs, that would be a cause for concern, but you're not. I was considered, you know, middle class, professional, educated. So it was almost the inverse of not meeting what research considered a red flag. And I said, I'm concerned about having my son early. Maybe it's my intuition. I don't know. But I ended up having him 10 weeks premature, getting airlifted in critical condition. So I had taken decisions before I even became a patient to make sure I had airlift insurance, to make sure that my son's nursery was ready, to make sure. So there was actually something on the opposite side of, well, you don't meet risk factors.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. I feel like also as females that don't get listened to as much as well. So that definitely plays a part, especially in maternal care. Thank you, Katie. Libby asks in the chat, anyone have suggestions for how health center staff can effectively collect race, ethnicity, gender, and other demographics in a way that is respectful and culturally humble? Any suggestions? Thank you. James says he takes into consideration the cultural, ethnicity, and religious heritage of my patients.
So if I could, I just wanted to kind of make the connection to, and James, that makes you an incredible clinician. I'm sure that you're being sensitive and inclusive in that way. I think with the demographics and the collection of demographics, it's about some of that measurement and data measurement. And I kind of, you know, I've heard from some people who represent communities that are traditionally marginalized, that sometimes when they're asked for that data, it's like, oh, I think it was on one of these calls. I think Towsy said it, that at one point, as a white person of privilege, responding to that gives me an edge. And at the same time, we had another PFAnetwork member representing the African-American community who said, when I respond to it, I feel like it gives me a check mark, you know, it kind of puts me at a disadvantage. So, but the importance of hospitals and healthcare centers getting that information is so important that we get it right, because it's only through that information that we're going to uncover the disparities that we all know are happening. And we're starting to do better with that. But the uncovering the disparities and getting this information right also means that we start to develop research and an evidence base that is reflective of the current needs of all people being served. So that's, I guess, for me, the connection. And that's why I think there's so many conversations going on around the country about how we do this. And Lindsay and Latasha did a great program creating a script around how hospitals and health center staff could get this information. but it was really hard for them. They really struggled with it because it's difficult to approach those conversations in a way that builds trust and confidence. So I guess that's where my head is going. Like, how do we get that?
Yeah. I think that leads into the next question, actually. Do you have a personal story, good or bad, about, oop, I clicked it, good or bad about providing and or confirming your demographic information in the hospital? And I will actually click on the next one. And also, have you been engaged in a program or project at a hospital aimed at reducing health and or care disparities? Dorothy says yes, her mother. Do you want to share, Dorothy? You can come off mute. You're welcome to.
Sure, I'll share. Oh my gosh, it's been years. I think I was 12 years old, and I will not forget it. And I don't know why it stays with me. But when my mother went to the hospital, and the doctor was telling her that she was on borderline for becoming a diabetic. And I'm gonna be honest with you, she really didn't understand the total concept of that. And I remember him telling her, well, you know, you all eat a lot of fried foods. And she walked out, and I was holding her hand, and well, she was holding my hand. And that plays back in my mind constantly because, first of all, but this, you got to remember, this was some time back, that if he had explained to her what that meant and not made her feel small, I believe that she would have been able to manage it better. Of course, they didn't have all the organization and the community programs that they have now. But like I said, I was 12 years old, and I'm in my 70s now. So, you know, that's been a while. But it's amazing how that stays with me because of that, the way the doctor treated her. And so going forward, when I became her caregiver, I recall her doctor asking her, well, the both of us, because I was her caregiver, certain questions about her health and her ability to get certain things. And I always let my mother answer because I didn't feel, you know, I felt that if she wanted me to answer, she would give me permission to do so. So she looked at me, and I was about to respond to the doctor. And his question was to her, what do you need? And so I was explaining to him what some of the things that I felt that we need for me to take care of her. And when we left, she emphatically told me, don't tell doctors my business, because they don't care about us. They trying to put us in a certain category. So what I'm saying is that if the patient don't have trust with the clinician or the person that's taking care of, most likely they're not going to get the full story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Dorothy. We'll go to Rosie, and then we are actually at the top of the hour, so feel free to drop off if you need to. Again, this is recorded. I will put the last question up here. We will add this to our forums. So feel free to answer these questions, share your stories in the forums, or if you're just more comfortable emailing me, I will add my email in the chat now. I can spell it correctly here. And we will, we can chat through email or on the forums. So go ahead, Rosie.
Well, real quick, two of them. One, some of you've heard this story, and it's like, and you know, it's true, it's the truth, but it hit me at a time when I really wasn't ready to be asked that question. After I lost David, about 3 months later, I went to an appointment at the same clinic where he was diagnosed, and you know, and so they knew that I was a widow, but they said, very loudly said, and we need to change your status to widow today. And I was like, wait a minute, I haven't changed my status yet. I'm not ready to change my status to widow. I still feel like I'm his wife and not the widow. And it all of a sudden just shook me to my core. And then it seemed to keep happening to me to every appointment I went to after that. The other thing is when she talked about diabetes, because I'm an amputee and I'm not the smallest person in the room, many times it's assumed I'm a diabetic. And I'm not. I have probably some of the best blood sugars in the world. I have no sign of diabetes, but yet, I used to say to David, I want it stamped across my forehead. I am not a diabetic. I lost my leg and my hip and my pelvis to a healthcare acquired infection. And if I were a diabetic, I might not have been here. So I think there's, those other things that they sometimes think that by looking at you, they can diagnose you without asking you the right questions.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for sharing. And thank you everybody who has shared and all the great discussions today. Again, feel free to head to the forums and add to the discussion or email me. And we will see you all next month for our August coffee chat. Thank you for joining.
Thanks.